Hi, comedian Von Decarlo here, and this is another episode of Behind the Punchlines here at the Comedy and Magic Club. So, gonna ask me a bunch of questions. All right, first one: who were your comedic influences growing up? So, first and foremost, I have to say Whoopi Goldberg because when I was a little kid, I used to perform all of her characters from the one woman show that was on HBO. Now, mind you, I grew up in the project, so I shouldn't have been able to see this, but we had a cable wire running from window to window, you know what I'm saying, back in those days. And I was able to see, I didn't see a lot growing up, but I was able to see Whoopi Goldberg do her one woman show. And I memorized all the characters and I would perform them for my family. And in the back of my mind, one day I was going to move to New York City. I grew up in Clairton, Pennsylvania, which is about 30 miles south of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And in my mind, I was going to move to New York one day and be just like Whoopi. I was going to do TV, film, stand-up, comedic acting, theater, an EGOT. Okay, so save this, because I'm not an EGOT yet, but I'm on my EGOT way. And the one character as a comedian, as a comedic actress, that influenced me a lot for my drunk Kamala character is Carol Burnett in Annie as Mrs. Hannigan. So I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do drugs, but I love playing drunk characters. So there was a point where I would do this character, drunk Kamala, and everyone thought I was really drunk, and I wasn't. I was just channeling Mrs. Hannigan. I love Carol Burnett. As far as straight stand-up, I mean, there was so many greats growing up that I wasn't allowed to watch. You know, the Richard Pryors, the Eddie Murphys. I mean, the list goes on and on. But as a woman, I wanted to focus on Whoopi. What was your first gig as a comedian like? So, early 2000s, running around New York, I was, how can I say it? I don't have like a comedy anniversary date in my head like a lot of stand-ups do, because doing stand-up comedy just felt like an extension of everything else I was doing. And at the time, like we're talking about doing extra work on films and getting under 5 works on soap operas. And I was working with this comedian who was like the Weird Al Yankovic of hip hop. And he would do all these parody videos of all the hip hop songs. And we met doing extra work and bouncing around New York in the comedy streets and everything. And he wanted to do his show live. He wanted to perform his parodies live. And I was like, oh, okay, time for me to, go work on these jokes. Like, cause he wanted me to host the show and we were gonna do this stand-up show. So I'm like, let me start going to open mics and doing all these bringer shows. So I started doing stand-up, and again, it just felt like an extension of everything else that I was doing. It felt like, oh, I'm doing stand-up now. It's like, oh, of course I'm doing stand-up now. This is part of the reason I moved to New York in the first place. So God bless that intro into stand-up, because it felt very natural. We were already working on a bunch of different skits. Little fun fact, the first parody comedic video on BET was on BET Uncut, and it was called TNA. And me and this other comedian, we did a parody of all the T and A videos. Yeah, so that's how I started doing stand-up. And my first gig was just that, an open mic and working on jokes. So what's the best piece of advice you've ever received in your career? Don't be afraid of the silence. And this, when I say career, I'm gonna focus on stand-up, because I've had advice, extended advice in a lot of different areas in my career. But as far as stand-up, the best advice was to never be afraid of the silence. So me being how I am, I take everything to the extreme. So in my upcoming development days of stand-up in New York City, I would practice bombing. Now, a lot of people thought that was crazy. And I didn't do it on shows that I was being paid to do a set and give my best performance. I would do it on shows like in workrooms and stuff. And basically, I wanted to practice the silence and getting comfortable with silence. I didn't want to, maybe I'm a control freak, because the thought in my head was forward thinking. Like, it's unreasonable to think that every single time you're on stage, from beginning to end, you're gonna kill. Every comedian has a story about bombing. So in my head, I would go, well, let me practice bombing. Let me practice getting the audience back. So I was dedicated to doing that. So whenever I had a show, like in a workroom, I had a plan. And whatever the plan was that day, I would have to stick to it. And on the days where it's practice bombing, it didn't matter. I could be killing. But I would, somewhere within the set, I would do something awkward or do something to lose the crowd deliberately, and practice getting them back. And it was the best thing I've ever did, because I'm not afraid of the silence. And there's two different silences, by the way. There's the silence of you lost the crowd and how are you going to get them back, which can feel very intimidating, especially if you don't have a lot of experience. And then there's the silence that is necessary, especially because I do some storytelling in my stand-up. Silence it just means they're listening. They're drawing in. So recognizing the difference and not being afraid of silence when you're on stage, especially if the silence is them leaning in and listening. Because in storytelling, a lot of times there's small jokes in between leading up to a big laugh at the end. So them being silent and leaning in and listening is important, because they have to be paying attention for that big laugh to pay off in the end. So I just wanted to add that to it. If you weren't a comedian, what career do you think you would have pursued? So this is interesting. So I had a journalism scholarship, and I left my journalism scholarship to go to art school. Because when I was studying journalism, the only reason I went to school for journalism is because my high school counselor told me that wanting to be a comedian, an actress, do TV and film, and move to New York and have these aspirations on television was unrealistic. And I'm a writer. At the core of everything I am, I'm a writer. And I was told that if I wanted to be on TV, I should take this journalism scholarship I was being offered and be practical about my dreams. Because where I'm from, being on television and standing on stage, making people laugh for a living, you might as well say you want to be the Easter Bunny, okay? That's not realistic where I'm from. So I listened and I took the journalism scholarship, and within the first, I think 2 years, I left that journalism scholarship, took out a ton of student loans to go to art school. And I finished my art degree, and then after that I moved to New York City, and I said I'm gonna do exactly what I want to do, because journalism and being in television news was, one, far too serious for me, and I felt like they were teaching us to say that we were non-biased, but be able to deliver the news and look like we're being non-biased, but be biased. And I'm like, so basically I'm acting? Got it. The irony of all of that is, in the world we're in now I finished school in 96, okay? I finished my art degree in 96. Cut to 2025, when I'm doing this interview, and the irony is that I think people go to comedy to seek the truth in everyday news, like The Daily Show and Saturday Night Live. Michael Che and what's that segment called? I'm sorry. Weekend Update. Jesus. So The Daily Show and Weekend Update, people lean towards that for the truth in news more than actual news. So the irony of that. So I guess God said, you're gonna be a journalist one way or another. What's your secret to connecting with your audience? So people say sex sells. especially as a woman, and a woman that is considered beautiful or voluptuous or attractive in any kind of way. People say sex sells, but I believe authenticity sells. And I think what has given me some longevity in what I do is that I'm very introspective, and I don't do a lot of political commentary and looking outside of myself for jokes anymore. I used to do a lot of it, but now my comedy has evolved into a place where it's very, very introspective. And it's always come from my point of view and from my life experiences, but I have really, really dug very deep into life and being very honest and raw and honest in comedy without exploiting myself or my family or anything like that, because I don't believe that you should exploit things in comedy either. But I do believe you should come from a very authentic and real place, and I that's what my comedy is, and that's why I connect with the audience, because I'm so authentic. And usually people come up to me after shows because in a lot of ways they're living vicariously through you on stage. And the biggest compliment I get, especially from women, in some of the subject matters that I deal with on stage, the heavier subject matters like death and things like that, people feel very inspired and encouraged that, oh, if she could handle these things and she could find humor in moving on from certain heavier things in life, then I can too. And you know what? The crazy things that goes through your head when you're going through a trauma, I normalize that for you, and people, they feel better. Okay, I'm about to get Jay Little off stage. So the weirdest place I've ever performed, this will be really quick and you'll get it without a long explanation. A speed dating event for lesbians. First of all, I was the only straight person in the room. No problem. But that wasn't what made it weird. And I could have probably excluded that. What made it weird was any speed date. They thought that having a comedian go up first would break the ice. It made it worse. Nobody laughed because you're trying to date these people and you don't want to laugh at something that somebody else might be offended by. It was the worst idea ever. And the only person that was like laughing out loud was the photographer of the event. It was weird. Thank you, bye. You gotta go get Jay off stage.